quickly this horror is disposed of, the better.
The first to emerge from his tree was Curly.
He rose out of it into the arms of Keko,
who flung him to Smee,
who flung him to Starkey,
who flung him to Bill Jukes,
who flung him to Noodler.
And so he was tossed from one to another till he fell at the feet of Hook.
All the boys were plucked from their trees in this ruthless manner.
And several of them were in the air at a time.
Like bales of goods flung from hand to hand.
A different treatment was accorded to Wendy, who came last.
With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her.
And, offering her his arm, escorted her to the spot
where the others were being gagged.
He did it with such an air.
He was so frightfully distinguished
that she was too fascinated to cry out.
She was only a little girl.
The children were tied to prevent their flying away, doubled up with their knees close to their ears.
All went well until Slightly's turn came, when he was found to be like those irritating parcels that use up all the stringing going round and leave no ends with which to tie a knot.
The pirates kicked him in their rage.
Just as you kicked the parcel.
Though in fairness, you should kick the string.
And strange to say, it was Hook who told them to belay their violence.
His lip was curled with malicious triumph.
While his dogs were merely sweating, because every time they tried to pack the unhappy lad tight in one part, he bulged out in another.
Slightly,
white to the gills,
knew that Hook had discovered his secret.
Which was this:
that no boy so blown out could use a tree wherein an average man needs stick.
Poor Slightly,
madly addicted to the drinking of water when he was hot,
had swelled in consequence to his present girth.
And instead of reducing himself to fit his tree he had,
unknown to the others,
whittled his tree to make it fit him.
Sufficient of this, Hook guessed to persuade him that Peter at last lay at his mercy, but no word of the dark design that now formed in the subterranean caverns of his mind crossed his lips.
He merely signed that the captives were to be conveyed to the ship and that he would be alone.
The first thing he did on finding himself alone in the fast-falling night was to tiptoe to Slightly's tree and make sure that it provided him with a passage.
Intently, he listened for any sound from the netherworld.
But all was as silent below as above.
The house under the ground seemed to be but one more empty tenement in the void.
Was that boy asleep, or did he stand waiting at the foot of Slightly's tree with his dagger in his hand?
There was no way of knowing.
Save by going down.
Hook let his cloak slip softly to the ground.
And then, biting his lips till a lewd blood stood on them,
he stepped into the tree.
He was a brave man.
But for a moment he had to stop there and wipe his brow, which was dripping like a candle.
Then,
silently,
he let himself go into the unknown.
As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, various objects in their home under the trees took shape.
The only one on which his greedy gaze rested,
long sought for and found at last, was the great bed.
On the bed lay Peter, fast asleep.
Thus defenceless, Hook found him.
He stood silent at the foot of the tree, looking across the chamber at his enemy.
Did no feeling of compassion disturb his sombre breast?
The man was not wholly evil. He loved flowers, I have been told, and sweet music. He himself was no mean performer on the harpsichord, and, let it be frankly admitted, the idyllic nature of the scene stirred him profoundly.
Mastered by his better self, he would have returned reluctantly up the tree.
But for one thing.
What stayed him was Peter's impertinent appearance as he slept.
The open mouth,
the drooping arm,
the arched knee,
they were such a personification of cockiness.
They steeled Hook's heart.
But what was that?
The red in his eye had caught sight of Peter's medicine, standing on a ledge within easy reach.
He fathomed what it was straight away.
And immediately knew that the sleeper was in his power.
Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful drug.
Blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession.
These he had boiled down into a yellow liquid, quite unknown to science.
Which was probably the most virulent poison in existence.
5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup.
His hand shook.
But it was in exultation rather than in shame.
Then one long, gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning,
wormed his way with difficulty up the tree.
As he emerged at the top, he looked the very spirit of evil breaking from its hole.
Donning his hat at its most rakish angle,
he wound his cloak around him,
holding one end in front as if to conceal his person from the night,
and muttering strangely to himself, stole away through the trees.
Peter slept on.
It must have been not less than 10 o'clock by the crocodile, when suddenly he sat up in his bed.
Wakened by he knew not what.
It was a soft, cautious tapping on the door of his tree.
Soft and cautious.
But in that stillness, it was sinister.
Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it.
Then he spoke.
Who is that?
For long, there was no answer.
Then again, the knock.
Who are you?
No answer.
He was thrilled.
and he loved being thrilled.
In 2 strides, he reached the door.
I won't open it unless you speak.
Then, at last, the visitor spoke.
In a lovely bell-like voice.
It was Tink, asking to be let in, and quickly he unbarred to her.
She flew in excitedly, her face flushed and her dress stained with mud.
What is it? Out with it.
And in one ungrammatical sentence, as long as the ribbons that conjurers pull from their mouths, she told of the capture of Wendy and the boys.
Peter's heart bobbed up and down as he listened.
Wendy bound?
And on the pirate ship.
And she who loved everything to be just so.
I'll rescue her.
As he spoke, he thought of something he could do to please her.
He could take his medicine.
His hand closed on the fatal draught.
Tinkerbell shrieked.
She had heard Hook mutter about his deed as he sped through the forest.
Why not? Poisoned? Well, who could have poisoned it? Don't be silly. How could Hook have got it down here?
Alas, Tinkerbell could not explain this.
Even she did not know the dark secret of Sally's tree.
Nevertheless, Hook's words had left no room for doubt.
The cup was poisoned.
Besides, I never fell asleep.
He raised the cup.
No time for words now.
Time for deeds.
And with one of her lightning movements, Tink got between his lips and the draught.
And drained it to the dregs.
Tink! How dare you drink my medicine?
But she did not answer.
Already she was reeling in the air.
What is the matter with you? Oh, Tink! Oh, did you drink it to save me? But why, Tink?
Her wings would scarcely carry her now, but in reply she alighted on his shoulder and gave his nose a loving bite. She whispered in his ear secretly, and then, tottering to her chamber, lay down on the bed.
His head almost filled the 4th wall of her little room as he knelt near her, in distress,
Every moment her light was growing fainter.
and he knew that if it went out,
She would be no more.
her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said.
Then he made it out.
She was saying that she thought she could get well again.
If children believed in fairies.
Peter flung out his arms,
There were no children there,
and it was night time.
but he addressed all who might be dreaming of the Netherland.
And who were therefore nearer to him?
Then you think,
Do you believe?
Tink sat up in bed, almost briskly to listen to her fate.
She fancied she heard answers in the affirmative.
And then again, she wasn't sure.
If you believe, clap your hands. Don't let Tink die.
Many clapped.
some didn't.
A few beasts hissed.
Clapping stopped suddenly.
As if countless mothers had rushed to their nurseries to see what on earth was happening.
Already Tink was saved.
And now, to rescue Wendy.
He swore this terrible oath.
Hook or me this time.